The storm rolled over Cinder Gulch like a living wall. Sand climbed the sky. Light turned the color of old copper. The shutters on Rimrock Cabin thrummed under Caleb Stone's hand, then caught and held. Dust rasped his teeth. Wind cut like a whip across his knuckles. He had seen worse. He still checked the latch twice. Another gust drove grit through the gaps between logs. He tied a red bandana at his throat and waited for the first fury to pass. The wind dropped a notch. In the pocket of silence that followed, a crack rang out. A Winchester, then a second. The long, high scream of a horse broke and went thin. A woman's cry cut off halfway. Caleb lifted the Spencer from the corner and slung his canteen. He opened the door into a world of moving sand. The air tasted metallic like a coin on the tongue. He stepped off the porch and let the wind lean his body. The storm shed weight as he moved, not ending only slouching into a dirty twilight. He kept low, hugging rock, letting memory do the steering. He knew every fold of this land. It had kept him alive. He found the horse by smell first. Blood and heat has its own thickness. The animal lay twisted, a fine chestnut with a roan splash at the belly, its eye a flat marble of dust. The tack was too good for a drifter. Twin Star burned into the leather clean and deep. He slid his fingers over the brand and felt the pressed star points. Whitcomb's men ran that brand, or men who took his coin. Bootprints scuffed the grit to the north, two sets heavy and impatient. Between them a scatter of lighter impressions, narrow, softened by the storm toes, dug hard as if the ground fought back. Barefoot, he followed. The canyon narrowed into a seam. Wind threaded it and made a sound like a whistle you cannot unhear. Caleb moved sideways through the pinch rifle low. Dust hung in sheets, then shredded into ribbons and vanished. The smell changed. Blood, yes. Also smoke, old and cold, trapped in stone. He eased into a cave that barely qualified as one. A crease with a roof. He stopped until his eyes caught the gloom. She was pressed against the far wall, one hand to her ribs, the other, around a knife that shook, though the point did not. Dark hair stuck to her temples. Deerskin torn and black with blood. Eyes open, clear waiting. "You are late," she said. Perfect English. No gratitude in it. No heat either. Just a statement. "I came when I heard." Caleb kept the Spencer down the barrel, angled at dirt. "That knife is not needed." "Not for you," she said. Her gaze tracked the end of his rifle, then lifted to his face. For what follows? Her grip slipped. The knife clicked on stone. She went to her knees. He crossed the cave in 2 steps. She was light and hot and shaking. He caught her by the elbow and under the shoulder and kept her upright. "Sit." He set her down with her back to the wall. "Drink." She coughed at the first swallow. Then she drank like someone who had crossed a week of sand. "Name," he said. "Maya Redbird." She watched the mouth of the cave while she spoke. Vision Keeper. The words cost her breath and something else. The pride did not leave. He lifted her hand away from the wound. A knife had gone in under the ribs. The bleeding had slowed, but the skin around it ran hot and angry red lines fanning away like the start of a map to nowhere. He tore a strip from his shirt and pressed. She did not flinch. He poured whiskey along the edge of the cloth. She did then. Who were they? 2 who thought the desert forgives. She closed her eyes once. They are not a problem anymore. "More will come." "Yes," she said. "They always come." He saw the leather thong at her waist when he reached for more cloth. He slid the small pouch free. Oiled hide. He opened it with his thumb and found a folded paper, brittle around the creases and stained by time. Half a map sketched in a hand that knew land. Creases lined up with peaks he knew in his bones. The other half was not a map. It was inked words in 2 hands. One, a tight script in Apache. One, a long looping English that pulled something from a dark cupboard in his head. "Remember, child, the morning brings mercy. Where the river listens, grief learns to breathe." His mother had a voice for such lines. Lillian Stone held a hymn steady like you hold a fevered child. He had not heard that voice in decades, and now here it was in a cave with a stranger bleeding into his palm. "How do you know my name?" he said. Maya's eyes opened. There was light in them and not of the storm. "Caleb Stone, scar under your jaw where a prisoner's wire made you bleed. Scar 3 inches below the heart where you did it yourself and stopped in time. You wake at the same darkness every night and listen for footsteps that are not there. He waited for anger. None came. Only a tired curiosity he could not bend. You have been told stories. I have dreamed them, she said, since I was a child. She swallowed. You will carry me or you will bury me. Decide. He tied the bandana around her ribs and lifted her. The cave mouth narrowed the world. Outside, the wind had sagged to a rasp. The sand filled his boots. He set his jaw and moved. He carried her across the yard and up the steps and through the door of Rimrock Cabin. The latch clicked behind them. He set her on the bed. The room held smoke and iron and a clean, thin smell of pine. The single window showed a square of dirty light, tools on pegs, 2 chairs, a table with a knife groove that tracked a story he had forgotten. He stoked the fire until water would boil and set up a basin and the bottle. He did not look at her until his hands were clean and ready. Hold this, he said, and set a clean cloth in her hand. He cut the deerskin away and cleaned the wound with slow, careful work. He found a sliver of a blade, fished it out, dropped it into a tin where it ticked once. He threaded a needle. He stitched in neat steps, his breath a metronome in out-knot cut. He wrapped her ribs and tied the cloth tight. She watched him without comment. When he reached to turn her, he saw ink between her shoulder blades, circles within circles, a center that spiraled inward and seemed to keep going. What is it, he said? The mark of a keeper, she said, one in a generation. You are a dreamer. I am a memory. She found his eyes. We keep what you forget. Past and what might be. The mercy hymn is not a song. It is a key. To what? Whisper basin, she said, where water remembers, where the dead can be heard long enough to set things down. He tied off the last strip and stood. He looked at the pouch again. He looked away. The room felt too small. My mother, he said, Lillian Stone. She had words like these. How do they end up with you? Because she gave them, Maya said, to Blue Cedar, to my grandmother. They wrote it together. 2 halves, 2 tongues. She touched the bandage. It takes 2 to open the basin. It takes you. He shook his head. He wanted to say it was superstition. He wanted to say 100 true things that did not fit this one. He poured water into a tin cup and set it by her hand. You carried me over your threshold, she said, by the sacred law that binds you. I do not bend to laws I did not choose. You chose enough. Her eyes softened at the edges. Silas Whitcomb will come for the map you found, for the hymn. He calls it a claim. He calls it progress. He wants to strip the basin for what he can hold. Whitcomb, Caleb said the name without color, the judge in Prescott, twin star. She nodded once. He sat in the chair and set the Spencer across his knees. The wind came back to its old tricks and pushed dust through the seams. The storm climbed the roof. Night sifted down. Maya slept and did not. Fever chased edges and left soft words behind. Names, prayers. His own name once solid as a rock in the road. He watched the door and watched her chest rise and fall. He did not light the lamp. Toward midnight, the fever broke. Her skin cooled under his palm, the heat lifting like a nightmare you remember and forget at once. He stayed where he was because moving would break something. Dawn pried a thin line into the room. Maya woke and sat up slow. She took the cup without being asked. You saved me, she said. You needed it. You will ask how I knew about your scars. You will ask how I knew your mother's words. I can explain one of those. The other you have to hear. Try me. Lillian Stone lived with my people before she married your father. She learned our songs. She gave her language to the mercy hymn so both sides could sing. She died protecting a child from Whitcomb, not a fever. The floor moved a little under his chair. He set his boots wider to steady what he could. You want Whisper Basin before the full moon, he said. You want me to sing. I want you to let yourself live. She held his gaze. The hymn opens the water when both halves rise. Your mother wrote one. I carry the other. Why me? Because I saw you, Maya said. Because you are the man on the stone under the moon beside me. He pushed to his feet. He checked the Spencer, the cylinder on the Colt, the latch on the window, the water in the pot. It was either that or sit with the shape of his mother's name. Sound built from the road that climbs the ridge, hooves on hard pan, not many, enough. He moved to the shutter and eased it with 2 fingers. Dust hung beyond the yard. Dark shapes cut it. A line of riders kept a steady pace. One sat straight and easy, a man who did not need to look back to know he was followed. A flash caught the weak light. Silver. The tick of a pocket watch floated on the air like a metronome for what was coming. Caleb let the shutter fall. The room took the sound and held it. He lifted the Spencer and looked at the door. Maya set her feet on the floor and reached for her knife with slow care. Outside, the watch kept time. The tick of the watch kept time with the storm's last breaths. Caleb slid the Spencer into a saddle scabbard and eased Maya's arm over his shoulders. "Back way," he said. "Hold to me." She nodded once. He lifted her felt heat through bandage, and Deerskin felt the tremor in her breath and pushed the door with his heel. The yard swam with dust. He crossed to the lean-to and shouldered aside a rack of harness. Behind it, a narrow cut ran between boulders, a cattle path smoothed by years and weather. He had widened it with a pick long ago for a day like this, though he had never said it aloud. They moved through rock that breathed dust. The cut opened to a dry wash. Caleb set Maya on a smooth shelf, then went to work. He dragged a spare saddle east along the wash-scuffed boot prints, wide and clumsy, cut a branch and swept his true path. He left a strip of cloth snagged on a mesquite thorn where the wash bent. When he returned, Maya's eyes tracked him, but her face stayed still. "You plan for visitors," she said. "I plan for weather," he said. "Sometimes it brings riders." They took the wash north. Wind dropped. The hush felt like the inside of a drum. After a quarter mile, the wash climbed and split. Caleb chose the cut that hugged basalt. The Spencer knocked softly against the scabbard. He could not hear the watch anymore. That did not mean it had stopped. By the time the land opened, the storm had slumped into a dirty smear along the western rim. Sun tried for an hour, gave up, and left the sky a dull pewter. Caleb found a slab of shade and set Maya there. He pried a canteen against her lips. "Slow," he said. She obeyed. He checked the bandage. The red lines at the wound's edge had not faded. Her skin was too hot. "Eliza Crane," he said. "Kestrel's Rest." "You trust her." He did not answer. He wiped grit from her brow with the heel of his hand. They moved by pieces of land he could draw from memory if someone set a knife to his throat. Volcanic caps like broken teeth, saguaros with bird holes at strange heights, a dry lake bed scored by the faint lines of wagon wheels. Mule deer slid off a low ridge and watched with the calm of animals that have named you harmless. In the distance, thunder, or gunfire, or both. He let it pass through him and kept north. They reached the first rise of town near dusk. Kestrel's Rest spilled out of a shallow fold a scatter of roofs that tried to huddle and could not. A church stood on the far end with a bell that wore a hairline crack that everybody knew about and nobody fixed. A telegraph wire stitched the street from the depot to the post. That wire sang when the wind found it. The wire sang now. Caleb skirted the main street and took the back lane that smelled of horses, coal smoke, and sweet fried corn. Maya kept her feet under her with care, then lost the thread and he caught her again. A lamp lit in a second-story window. The flame swelled, then steadied. A woman's silhouette moved in the square of light. A breath later, the side door opened. Eliza Crane filled the space with a body small and solid and a gaze that missed nothing. Her hair was a braid of storm cloud and ash. "Bring her in," she said. "Do not touch my painted bowl with that bandage. Everything else is yours." Caleb carried Maya through a room that smelled of sage soap and old lemon. Glass jars lined shelves. A braid of garlic swung from a nail. Eliza's hands were on Maya before Caleb lowered her to the cot. "Spoke of fever," Eliza said. "She has it." "Knife under the ribs," Caleb said. "I cleaned it. Whiskey, stitched." "You did tidy work," Eliza said. "Anger is ahead of infection by a half day. We will lean on her to slow." She looked up at Maya. "Maya Redbird, I hoped the day I knew your grandmother would bring your name to my door. Never wished for it to look like this." Maya watched Eliza with the calm that had threaded through even her hard breaths. "Elder," she said, "you smell like sage and rain before it comes." Eliza's mouth made a small shape that might have been a smile. She set water to boil, crushed dried roots with the heel of her palm, measured leaves by memory, then checked them by eye, then sniffed, not trusting any one sense, to tell the whole truth. She swabbed the wound with something that bit and cooled at the same time. Caleb stood back until Eliza pointed him to the stove and the cupboard and the basin. She asked for milk, honey, clean cloth, a chair by the window, more light. He moved after the words, like a mule that knew the harness and did not resent it. When the work had its rhythm, Eliza set a kettle to the side of the heat and called Caleb to the back room. The pallet there held a cedar chest at its foot. She crouched and traced the grain before she opened the lid. Paper smell rising. Dust fine as flour. "Your mother's hand never changed," Eliza said. She lifted a stack of pages bound with ribbon, then set those aside and pulled free a thin-wrapped parcel, oiled cloth. She unwrapped it like a meal you know will save you. The paper inside had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. The English side was a looped hand he knew. The other script he did not. It curled in ways that felt like water. Eliza handed the bundle to him. He took it and felt the years in it. The mercy hymn breathed out of the folds. "I remember a line he said before the thought reached his tongue. Morning brings mercy." Lillian wrote that in this room, Eliza said. She had a baby in a crib by the stove and ink on her fingers. Your father carved that notch in the table with a bad knife while he waited for her to look at him. She did not look until she was done. Caleb cleared his throat. The air in the small room crowded him. He set the pages down before he creased them in a way that could not be forgiven. Eliza studied his face the way a nurse watches a child walk on a healing ankle. She did not touch him. She did not say she was sorry. She reached into the chest a second time and brought out a leather journal with a tear at the top edge. Later she said, "Now we keep a woman between worlds from slipping." They returned to the front room. Maya's eyes had a clearer shine. Eliza tilted the cup to her lips. Steam rose. Maya coughed once, then drank again. "Eliza," Caleb said, "Whitcomb's mark was on a saddle in my wash." Eliza's jaw made a small move. She kept the cup steady. "He will walk this town like it is a room he paid for," she said. "He will not own my door." Voices rolled in from the street. Hoarse bells and rough laughter. A piano in the saloon picked up a tune and dropped it. The church bell shook once and rattled at its own crack. Maya set the cup aside. "He wants the basin," she said. "He wants the mercy hymn so he can break the place and brag that it made him rich." "Men talk in my shop," Eliza said. "Boys who work for Twin Star use coins stamped with his mark to buy sugar. They like to show the shine." Caleb moved to the window and looked slant through lace. A pair of riders tied off at the hitch and stepped into the saloon. Their coats still wore the grit of Cinder Gulch. A third man paused at the telegraph office and lit a cigar from a match struck on the doorframe. He did not read the posted notices. He stood with his back to them and smoked. He had a holster that did not ride like a toy. The wire sang over his head message to message like a long metal bird. "I need a thing," Eliza said without looking at him. "The old Spencer. Your father left it with me when he decided he did not want to see the war on a rack. This town has a way of testing a person's promise to never lift a gun again." She crossed to a tall cabinet and drew a long canvas case from behind a stack of quilts. Inside the rifle lay oiled and ready the wood dark with care. Caleb ran his hand along the stock. His father's name was cut shallow at the comb. The letters had worn smooth as if a thumb had worried them every night. Eliza rested her palm on the barrel. "Take it," she said. "Your hands know it." He took it. The weight set right against his shoulder. He did not smile. Maya lay back and let the sound of the room crawl under her skin. The kettle hissed. The window talked to the wind. The floor creaked in places because bodies had taught it to. She looked at Caleb. "How far to the basin?" she said. "Far enough," he said. The door latch lifted. A young man in a dusty bowler stuck his head and then half his body. He had the open face of someone who had not yet learned the cost of being helpful. "Miss Crane," he said, "Judge Whitcomb's riders are asking after a woman with a cut side. They have money for a name." Eliza did not move toward him. "I sell stitches, not names," she said. "Tell the judge he can come by thread if he is stocking his saddlebags." The young man flushed and pulled the door to. Caleb heard him breathe twice on the porch before his steps took him away. Eliza's eyes cut to Caleb. He did not need them to. He had already set cartridges in his pocket and slung the Spencer. Maya watched the exchange without hurry. "You came when you heard a cry in the storm," she said. "Do not pretend that was for anyone else's sake." He did not answer her. Eliza packed dry cakes and a small twist of herbs into a cloth bag and pressed it into his hand. "For tonight," she said, "yerba mansa to coax the wound away from heat. Drink all of it. Do not fear the taste. It has helped men with worse habits. She set her palm a breath from Maya's forehead and held it there until her breath slowed again. Then she turned down the lamp and opened the back door. Caleb carried Maya into evening that still held daylight in its teeth. They kept to alleys and fence lines. A cat slid off a barrel and watched with eyes that did not blink. At the telegraph office, the cigar man had gone. The wire still sang. They crossed behind the livery where someone snored under a blanket that had not been washed since spring. At the edge of town, Caleb set Maya on a low wall and went to fetch the horses. Eliza had seen to the tack while they were inside. The cinches lay neat and sure. A second canteen hung light as a promise. Maya swung into the saddle and sat tall by effort. The fever had eased, but the weariness that follows illness had settled deep. She closed her eyes for a count, then opened them and looked to the north. The air there carried a cool thread he could taste on his tongue. They rode out by the road that cut along the old quarry. Light fell in flat sheets across the scarred stone. The church bell thunked once like a heart that had forgotten the next beat and then remembered it. Caleb let the horses pick their pace, then nudged them into a steady climb. Past the last outbuilding, heat dropped and sound changed. Crickets sawed at the edges of the ditch. A nightbird called a name that was not his and then called it again. They reached a shoulder of ground that gave the town back to them in a wide bowl of glow. Kestrel's Rest looked like a thing you could hold. Caleb did not. He turned the horses and took the path along the ridge. They made the saddle before the moon won its fight with cloud. At the top, the land opened like a hand. Caleb reined in and let the horses breathe. The air smelled of creosote and far water. Maya lifted her face and let her eyes close for a moment the way you stand at a door and listen before you knock. Caleb was the one who saw them first. 4 riders in the cut below the far ridge. They rode 2 and 2 spare and steady. The man in front sat a shade tighter than the others like a habit had set into bone and never loosened. When he lifted his arm to point something at his vest pocket, caught what little light there was. A coin, perhaps, or a watch that loved to keep time. The silver flicked once a heart blink. Then the riders slipped into the darker run of the trail and were gone from the open sight. Caleb put his hand on the Spencer without looking at it. Maya's breath hitched and smoothed. The horses settled under them and waited for what the hands on their reins would ask them to do next. He drew a slow breath and let it go. The ridge took the sound and gave nothing back. They rode the ridge until the sky thinned to pewter and the wind forgot its teeth. The town fell away behind them, a small spill of lamplight in a bowl of dark. The trail ran like a seam along black rock. Caleb kept the horses at a steady climb and listened. The wire song from Kestrel's Rest had gone silent. Crickets took its place. Every now and then the ground gave back the hollow drum of hooves from somewhere that was not their path. Echo or company. He treated it like weather and kept north. They dropped into a draw where the stone rose in a smooth spine with a ledge tucked under it. The place held its own hush. Caleb tied the horses in the shadow of a juniper and built a fire the size of a hand. He set water on and opened the cloth twist Eliza had packed. The smell hit first. Bitter root and wet dirt and something green that remembered rain. "Drink," he said when the steam stopped hiding from the night. Maya took the cup. Her hand shook, then steadied. She grimaced and swallowed again. Heat climbed the hollow of her throat. She set the cup on her knee and closed her eyes. The fever had loosened its hold, but it had not left. Caleb checked the bandage with 2 fingers and a soft knuckle. The red that had flared like a rising sun had faded a shade. He freshened the wrap and propped her with a folded blanket so breath could get into the lower lungs. When she leaned back, the circles and spiral mark at her nape looked like a small galaxy tucked into skin. He turned away before he stared. The cedar chest in Eliza's back room had given him a journal. He had not opened it there. He opened it now. The leather bent in a way that said a pair of hands had learned its language and then taught it to a son who did not know they had a lesson for him. He found the first page that mattered without guessing. April 15th, 1853. Accepted cautious as a shy pupil. Blue Cedar watches me when I write and says I keep 2 rhythms at once. He could hear his mother when he laid a finger on her words. Not just the sound of a voice in a room, but the sense of how she held a thought and turned it in her palm until it showed its other face. He read the lines about the people she lived among, what they sang at dawn, how they did not name the dead as if names were cords that pulled spirits back, how sound traveled in their canyons like a horse that knew its way home without reins. February 3rd, 1854. We walked into a basin that should not exist at this height. I spoke a word, and the water spoke it back in a shape I did not recognize as mine, and yet felt more true. My hand shook when I tried to write it. Blue Cedar laughed and told me to write the laugh. He found the page with a small oil stain at the top. The stain had the shape of a bird, if a bird forgot how to be a line and became a smudge. October 12, 1854, we finished the verses. We broke them in half, 2 tongues, 2 keepers. We argued about trust and greed and hope. We chose caution. Blue Cedar says a key should not fit only one lock. I could not disagree. He turned a page and another. The handwriting changed when she was tired, small and tight when she was careful, looping when she let the words out on a longer leash. He found the line the outline of his life had been waiting for. April 27, 1856. I woke from a dream in which a man with winter eyes stood beside a woman marked by circles at her neck. The moon was full. They sang what we wrote, and it did not belong to us anymore. I felt peace in the dream and woke crying. Maya shifted against the blanket. He looked up. Her eyes were half open. A small smile altered the line of her mouth and then left it unchanged. "Read it to me," she said. He did. He put no longing into the words, and still they carried it. When he finished, the fire had settled to coals that held their heat like a truth that does not need to shout. "You hear the way she speaks of sound," Maya said. "She writes like she already knows the basin, not like someone who saw it once." She knew what rooms felt like, he said. His finger traced the edge of the page without touching the ink. She knew how to listen when a thing would not tell you its name. "Sing," Maya said. He shook his head. The night pressed closer, even the crickets taking a small pause to hear what he would say. He did not give them anything. "Talk it like a prayer if you cannot give it melody yet," she said. "Let the words learn your breath." He hated that it made sense. He set the journal on his knee and put a palm to his chest. Breath in. The scar under his ribs prickled as if answering a knock on a door that had not been opened in years. He tried the line that had waited inside a folded pouch in a cave while dust found new places to live in his hair. "Remember, child, the morning brings mercy." The ridge threw the line back soft enough not to scare the horses. He tried another and let his voice ride the shape the words wanted. "Where the river listens, grief learns to breathe." Maya's eyes closed. She lifted a hand as if catching light and lowered it as if handing it to the ground. She answered in her own tongue. The consonants had angles, the vowels flowed like water under ice. The echo shifted when her voice joined his. It thickened. It layered. The ledge caught their sounds and sent them up the stone. A pair of nightbirds left their perch and went to find a quieter tree. He felt something ease in his chest that had never been tight in a way a doctor could hear. His mouth wanted to keep going. He shut it as if it belonged to someone else for a moment and needed reminding whose it was. "Good," Maya whispered. "Place the words on the back of your teeth. Now let your breath drop lower. You are singing from your throat. Let the body help. You ask a man who has not sung since he was 8 to place words on the back of his teeth. I am asking you to remember that your body knows things you did not write down." They practiced a few more lines, not enough to wake anyone with a temper, enough to feel how 2 halves found each other. He did not look at her when they stopped. He did not need to. The silence after was a seam neatly closed. Cloud thickened. The wind changed. The smell of rain that would not come did its old trick. Caleb banked the coals until they showed without showing. He set the journal under the blanket where it would stay dry and laid the Spencer within reach. He slept a little and listened more. Close to dawn, a clink followed by a muffled curse came from downslope. He laid a hand on Maya's arm and felt her come awake at once. He touched a finger to his lips and pointed to the cut of trail where low thorn brushed stone. The sound came again, a buckle-tapping rock, a man trying to make less noise than his gear wished to make. They left no fire to kill. They saddled by feel and led the horses until they were sure the sound behind them was on the old path and not on theirs. The light turned the color of bone. When they mounted, the air had a new chill in it that did not come from weather alone. They climbed. The land changed without ceremony. The red of the low country fell behind. Volcanic shoulders shouldered the sky. Juniper thinned. Grass gave up and crept into the cracks it could find. The path went narrow enough that your knee could polish rock if you were not careful. The horses moved with the care of old men stepping off a porch in winter. They topped a rise and walked into a corridor the mountain had made on purpose. 2 stones stood where no stones had reason to stand. They faced each other with a distance between them that fit 2 horses single file if the riders breathed in. The inner faces had been worked when the world was younger. Lines and circles and a spiral that matched the mark at Maya's neck without copying it. She reached a hand toward the left pillar and stopped a breath short. "Sentinel gates," she said quietly. "Older than my grandmother's names for them." He sat still and let his eyes drink the place. Sound changed in the corridor. It held the hoof fall like a small bell in a small church. It held breath like a hand. Beyond the gates, the light had a color he could not teach his tongue to name. He touched the stock of the Spencer, not because the stones made him nervous, because the back of his neck said a thing he had learned to obey. They put the horses forward. Caleb took the lead. Maya's mount came behind and did not balk. When they passed between the stones, the air cooled a degree. A shiver walked the length of his arm and did not stop at his wrist. The path bent, and the world opened a little. A rifle cracked from behind them. Stone chipped near Caleb's boot and made a sound like teeth breaking in a mouth. The echo stacked and came back as 3 quick claps that did not belong to any one gun. He turned his head with care and counted shadows on the ridge they had just left. The horses planted and stood like carved things. He tasted metal and dust and something like copper. The second shot took a sliver off the right-hand pillar and set it singing. He put his body between Maya and the open rock and reached for the Spencer without looking down. The second shot sang in the stone and left dust circling in the cold air. Caleb put a knee into his horse and pushed through the narrow. Maya stayed tight on his hip. A third crack bit the rock behind them and made the corridor ring like a bell in winter. He held his breath until they cleared the bend. The path fell away into a slope of shale and scrub that dropped toward a hidden floor. Sound changed at once. Wind went soft. Water spoke somewhere out of sight, a hush that felt like a hand on the back. They slid down through switchbacks cut by rain and hooves older than theirs. The mountain held the sound of pursuit and turned it into a muddle. A shouted order thinned to a hiss. A curse broke in 2 and blew apart. When they reached the lower ledge, the basin opened like a secret kept too long. A round of water lay in the center, still as glass. Threads of stream fed it in silver runs. A pillar of dark stone stood on a small island, its skin carved by hands that did not waste a line. Maya's breath hitched. Her voice fell to a whisper that was not for him. Whisper basin. Caleb felt it before he believed it. The air had weight and a coolness that did not belong to altitude alone. The hair on his forearms lifted. His mouth tasted clean for the first time since Cinder Gulch tore the skin off his tongue. "We work fast," he said. They tied the horses in the shade of a willow whose roots drank clear water without ripples. He set a small fire in a hollow against rock and kept it low. Maya took the pouch from her waist with the care of someone unwrapping a memory. Caleb took the pages Eliza had given him from inside his coat. He laid both halves beside each other on a flat slab. The 2 scripts looked like consonants and vowels long separated by war that had finally been told to sit at the same table. "Purify," Maya said, "before we call anything." She pulled off her moccasins and stepped into the shallows. The water climbed her ankles, her calves, her knees without a sound. Caleb followed with his boots in one hand and cold walking up his bones. Every scar on his body took the water as if waking from a long, hard sleep. They stopped when the surface pressed their ribs. Maya faced east. She lifted both palms over the water and lowered them slow. Her eyes were steady. "I come to ask for a voice," she said, "not from me. For those who were cut short. For those who waited without words." Caleb drew a breath that went where she had asked him to put it before. He did not try to make poetry. He did not have any. He let the truth find its shape. "I come to stop punishing myself," he said. "I come to set down a weight I did not need to carry this long. If there is a door here, I ask to open it." They walked out of the water with skin burning from cold in a way that felt like alive and not like pain. Maya slipped back into deerskin. Caleb set his hat on his head and stood listening. The basin breathed. It was not a trick of wind. "First verses," Maya said, to turn their feet on the way in. They stood at the edge, where the round of the pool made a circle on stone. She pointed to a small lip near the waterline. He could hear the note of it faint and precise, as if the rock kept a pitch waiting. She sang one line in her language and touched that note with the edge of her voice. He felt the hair along his neck lift again. He answered with the English line that paired with hers. He did not push the sound. He placed it. "Where the river listens, grief learns to breathe." The water took it. The sound did not bounce. It traveled slow and true across the mirror until it met the pillar. The pillar gave it back with a shape that was not the one they had sent. The echo added a second voice and a third. The ground seemed to hum along. The small streams picked up the tone and carried it upstream into the stones that made their beds. They sang 3 more pairs of lines. The air shimmered over the pool, as if heat had arrived for a moment and not stayed. A low murmur started in the grass and moved through it like wind through wheat. Caleb turned his head and looked up toward the gates. Figures showed and went behind ridges and showed again. Riders moved in fits, then slowed, then turned where no trail cut. One horse backed wrong and almost sat on its tail. A man waved his hat as if shooing flies that were not there. The basin had confused their sense of place. "It will not keep him," Maya said. "He listens to his own voice too closely to be taken by any other." Caleb raised the Spencer and sighted on a high line of rock. He did not fire. He waited and watched. The first 2 riders broke through with the look of men who had walked out of a maze by accident. They stopped at a stream where a man would normally jump and hesitated for no reason any map could explain. The third pulled up behind them and swore with patience. The fourth kept coming. The fifth came later with a quiet seat and a neat coat. Silver flashed at his vest pocket when he moved. The tick of his watch reached them in the still air. Judge Silas Whitcomb took in the basin with an expression of possession, not awe. The riders spread on Whitcomb's gesture. He put a boot on the ground and let the horse drink. He did not look at the horses. He looked at the pillar and the 2 figures by the water and the papers on the rock. He smiled as if in greeting. "Mr. Stone," he called, "it is kind of you to keep my property safe so close to water." Maya's mouth did not move. Caleb did not answer. He chose a choke point between 2 arms of the pool and moved to it at a walk that did not hurry. The judge lifted his hand and 2 men started forward at a trot. Caleb put a bullet into the rock at their feet. Stones spat their shins. They dropped without being told. The Spencer worked smooth. The echo in the basin made every shot 3. The men froze and looked like they had more company than they did. Whitcomb tilted his head as if listening to a choir he did not quite approve of. "Do not make a church of this puddle," he said. "I brought a deed." Maya did not look at him. She looked at the pillar and then at Caleb. "It is time," she said. She went to the water's edge and gathered the pages like a teacher who knows the lesson but still honors the book. Caleb stood where he could hold the line and keep the men from circling without crossing a stream. He counted 6 riders, all told one limping from an old fight, one green with a tight jaw, one who had seen a thing in war that never left him. The judge made a 7th if you counted him as a man in a fight and not a man who sent men to fight. Maya sang the opening of the Mercy hymn in a voice that no longer waited for permission. The notes sat clean on the air. The basin took them and multiplied them until the space around the pillar felt crowded. Caleb held the first verse of English on his tongue as if he were lining up a shot he refused to rush. He waited for the place she left him. He stepped into it. "Remember, child, the morning brings mercy." The crack of a pistol split the line in 2. A bullet slapped water near Maya's knees and skipped like a flat stone at a fair. Caleb put a round at the muzzle flash. A shout answered. The men fired again and their shots went high or off because the basin did not let sound sit where it had been placed. A third shot came from the left and took a notch out of the pillar's edge. The stone rang with a pitch that would have broken a glass if you had held one up. Caleb fired twice and shifted to put the slab of a low knoll between him and the better angle. Maya did not stop. Her voice rose and fell like tide. The English lines waited for him. He went back to them as if he had stepped out to shut a door and returned to the table where someone important had kept speaking without pause. Where the river listens, grief learns to breathe. Whitcomb stepped forward and raised his revolver. He was careful and not careless. He took aim the way a man reads a line of law he has used to hang 24. Caleb swung the Spencer and fired. The judge's shoulder jerked. He steadied. The watch at his pocket swung once like a pendulum that refused to stop. Maya's tone changed. The verses came to the place where the two halves braided. The language stopped separating itself. He felt the power of the chord before he heard it. His ribs hummed. The surface of the pool drew a spiral that began at the pillar and widened until it touched both feet. Light grew from water and did not blind. It did not glow like a lamp or burn like a match. It lifted the dark by a shade that let faces form. The basin filled with a soft crowd, outlines first, then eyes that knew how to look. Men with hair cut by other men in a hurry. Women with calloused hands that still looked like they could hold a child and a shovel both. A soldier with a hole in his coat where a rib had poked through to try to breathe. A girl with a ribbon that had outlived her by years. A man who looked like a preacher and not like a man who should have had his throat cut. An old woman whose eyes were young. They did not walk. They did not float. They stood in the place where the water had turned to light. Two figures stepped forward as the cord settled. One was the woman whose handwriting had shaped Caleb's breath through the night. The other was the woman who had made her laugh at an oil stain and tell him to write the laugh. Lillian Stone and Blue Cedar met in a touch that made the hair on his wrists lift and hold. Caleb could not speak to them. He could only keep the line and hold the English when Maya passed it. He did that one thing and kept doing it because any other thing would have meant dropping something he had no right to set down. Whitcomb fired into the light and saw his bullets pass through the bodies as if they were not bodies. He shouted something about fraud and riverbeds and title. His men saw their own long gone and made a sound that was not swearing at all. One man with the tight jaw lowered his pistol like he had been told to put a toy away. Maya raised her hands. Her eyes filled and did not spill. She sang the final braid and gave it to the pillar. The pillar gave it back. The water column rose until it met the low cloud. It was not a spear. It was not a wall. It was a lift. The faces looked full at Whitcomb. He did not look away. A change came over his mouth. The set of it lost its iron. His eyes moved the way a man reads a file that names him. Names he thought buried stepped out. Places he had washed out of his coat returned like stains do when you pour water on old blood. He went to his knees because his legs forgot the work. The watch at his pocket kept ticking out of habit alone. He made a sound that calendars do not record. He put both hands on the water and felt it as if it were a rail on a porch that would not hold him because it did not belong to him. A pistol cracked and found Caleb's side. He felt the heat and the punch and then a distant ache as if someone had told a story about pain in another room. He stayed on his feet because the line needed finishing and Maya needed the second tongue. He pressed a hand to the wet on his shirt and sang. His voice held. Maya reached for him when the last note went where it had to go. She caught him by the belt and the back of his shoulder and took his weight toward the shallows. The water still held light. It slid over the wound and warmed like hands by a hearth in cold weather. The warmth went deep and soft. His breath changed from hard to long. He watched the edges of the hole in his side close like a mouth deciding against a word. The blood slowed. The flow stopped. The ache went quiet. A mark formed like a small moon under the skin. He lay back on one elbow and watched the last drops of light lift off the pool as if pulled by a gentle wind. The faces softened and went to mist and then to the look water has when no one touches it. Lillian did not speak, but the peace that had taken her face in the dream on her page sat in the air and did not care about pages. Blue Cedar looked at Maya like a grandmother looks at a child who has carried a heavy bowl without spilling. Whitcomb knelt in the shallows. His watch had gone silent. He looked up at Caleb with the wet face of a man who had not expected to meet what he met. "I saw them," he said. The voice came out small. "They would not stop looking at me." Maya moved to stand between the judge and the pillar. Her breathing steadied. Her bandage had bled through, but the red was dull, not bright. Caleb pushed himself upright. He felt light in a way that did not mean weak. He put a hand to his side and found only skin and a slick of water. He got to his boots and walked to the place where Whitcomb knelt. The judge did not reach for the gun he had dropped. "What do we do with him?" Caleb said. The basin gave him no answer that used words. The ripple at the edge of the pool tapped the stone twice and stilled. The men on the ridge had fallen back. The horses at the streams had their heads down and drank as if nothing had changed in the world. The pillar held its markings like a book in a language that remembers you even when you do not remember it. The wind moved a willow leaf. The leaf found water and stayed there floating as quiet as a thought you cannot ignore. They bound Whitcomb's hands with a lead rope and set him on a spare bay. He did not fight. His eyes were fixed on a piece of water that was not there. The watch at his vest pocket hung still and dull. Caleb checked the knots, then touched his own side. Skin a faint pull where a wound had been the slick taste of iron gone from his mouth. They climbed out by a gentler cut. The basin closed behind them without sound. At the sentinel gates, Maya reached up and brushed the carved spiral with a fingertip. The stone felt cool. She did not speak. Caleb watched the light lying thin along the ridges. The world outside the basin had its old dry color again. Dust lifted off their horses and hung at knee-height. The ride to Kestrel's Rest stretched long. Whitcomb swayed in the saddle like a man who had come off a ship and could not find the land under him. The trail sharpened with the heat. Saguaro stood like sentries that had seen enough. A hawk trailed them, and then lost interest. When the church bell came into earshot, it made one soft note and kept its crack to itself. Eliza opened her door before they knocked. She took in the rope and the eyes behind it, then stepped aside. "Set him there," she said. "I will keep him quiet." She led them to the back room. Whitcomb sat when she pushed his shoulder. His mouth moved. No sound. She checked his pulse and his eyes and the steadiness of his breath. She set a cup of water in his hands and guided the rim. Water ran out one corner of his mouth and down his chin. She wiped it with a cloth like he was a stubborn child. "Telegraph the fort," she told Caleb. "A judge has fallen ill. His men lost him. They can collect him without parading him down the street." Caleb crossed to the office. The wire sang a steady tune. The operator tapped a message with 2 fingers and a jaw that moved with each dot. The reply came quick. Caleb signed the page and walked out with a face that said nothing. In Eliza's front room, Maya slept. The fever had let go and left her with the hollow fatigue that comes after. Eliza leaned in the doorway and watched Caleb. "You got her there," she said. He nodded. "You came back," she said. He nodded again. She set a hand on his arm where a band of clean skin marked the line where the water had held him. She did not ask how the hole had gone. She turned to the stove and poured coffee that tasted like the first cup after a hard winter. Fort Meridian sent 2 troopers and a wagon. They lifted Whitcomb with care into the back and tied a line none of them expected to need. The younger trooper avoided Caleb's eye. The older one looked full at him, and then at the rope, and then at the judge's face. He tipped his hat without comment. The wagon rolled out. The wire above the street sang once a short message to the next town. Caleb and Maya packed at first light 2 days later. Eliza met them at the edge of the porch and put a bundle into Maya's hands that smelled of mint and juniper and a sweet root that lived near cold water. She turned to Caleb and handed him the journal without words. He slid it into his coat. The weight sat right. They rode south and then east to the reservation where the cottonwoods made shade like a promise. Children watched with the stillness of animals when they first see a new thing. Men stood under a frame of poles that had not yet been dressed for shade. The women came to the edge of their doorways and let their eyes measure Caleb with a length that would not be shortened by haste. Chief Iron Fox stepped out from between 2 lodges as if he had been waiting behind one for years. His hair held more white than black. His eyes held the opposite. "This is the man my daughter speaks of," he said. Eliza put the words on her tongue and moved them into English. "I have seen his face in smoke and in the back of my own eyelids. Maya took 2 steps and bowed her head. He placed his palm on the crown of her hair and left it there for a count that did its work. Night carried a fire and slow drum. The older women sang lines that curved and came back to their start. Maya told the story without raising her voice. She did not call it a miracle. She said the basin listened. She said the mercy hymn needed 2 hands to hold and 2 mouths to give it breath. She said Whitcomb's men saw what the water remembered and laid down their guns without being taught to. Caleb spoke when the circle opened for him. He said Lillian Stone had put half the song on paper in a room above Eliza's kitchen. He said Blue Cedar had held the other half and guarded it with a life. He did not try to dress any of it in extra. Iron Fox nodded once. He looked at his people and then at Maya. "Those who wish to help guard a place where water keeps names may go," he said. "Those who wish to stay will keep the rest of us fed when the cold comes." In the morning, 5 families set their bundles near a row of ponies. Silent Fox, a healer with a careful way of touching bark, stood near the back with a satchel of roots and a basket tightly woven and lined with clay. A young man with a banjo slung a case and grinned at everything. His wife carried a kettle in which she kept the banjo picks because it was the only box that closed right. An old woman with eyes like gravel set her jaw and lifted a pack that weighed more than she did. They turned north. The land between the reservation and the basin ran long and old. Dust lifted and settled. A storm threw light on a far ridge and then thought better of it. They camped where water held. Silent Fox took a leaf and broke it and held it under Maya's nose. Her breath opened. He smiled and tucked the rest away. They reached the gates by noon 2 days later. The air cooled when they passed through. Even the banjo player stopped humming. Whisper Basin lay in green and silver and dark stone, the way a good note hangs after the voice is closed so that the room keeps it for a time. They did not talk. They walked down to the water and stood where the circle met rock. The willow showed new leaves the color of pennies seen under ice. They made a small camp in the low stand of cottonwood and willow on the western rim. A cook fire threw smoke that went straight up and held there. The young couple set a pot and argued in whispers about how much salt belongs to beans. The old woman cut willow shoots and bent them into a hoop. Silent Fox put plants in the ground near the stream with a hand that did not fuss and did not hurry. Caleb and Maya crossed to the island when the sun fell off the upper face of the pillar. The stone held its carvings like a book that did not care about who could read. They set their palms on it at the same height. Heat lived in the rock in a way that had nothing to do with noon. They did not speak vows. They let breath meet breath and let the old mark on Maya's neck line up with the spiral carved above their hands. "Guard it with me," she said. "Yes," he said. They stepped back and sang the quiet version of the hymn that opens nothing more than a person's chest. The words moved out over the pool and came back without tricks. The surface mirrored sky and kept the clouds from falling. The sound ran into the little streams. A deer lifted its head and then bent it to drink without fear. The echo said just enough and then fell silent again. Work began without anyone saying the word. Poles cut, cross beams set. A tin cup hung from a nail in the first post because someone needed both hands free. A fence took shape that kept horses where grass would forgive them. A low shed went up with a roof that would not brag, only hold back weather. At the edge of the water, the old woman set her hoop and wove a basket that would carry wet things without leaking. The banjo came out at dusk. The player found a slow line and played it until the frogs took it away and made it theirs. Caleb stood ankle deep and let the water find its level against his boots. He put his hand to his chest and touched the pale ridge that had carried a bad night for years. The skin felt cool. He pressed his palm flat and then lowered it to the surface. For a moment his reflection looked like a man he had not seen in a long time. He did not study it. He let the water smooth. Maya came to stand beside him. She did not have to ask what the look on his face meant. He did not have to give her an answer. The willow moved in a breeze that had not been there a moment ago. The light grazed the pillar and made one line stand out from the others, then eased it back into the rest. Night settled slow. The first stars showed in the pool before they showed in the sky. Voices rose and fell at the cook fire. Someone laughed and then caught the sound in their hand as if not to spill it. Caleb listened to the basin breathe and heard his mother somewhere in the quiet, not a voice, only a shape of peace a room can remember. He stood with Maya until the cold climbed their shins and told them the edge had said enough for today. Then they stepped out and left no mark that the water did not choose to keep. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.